Well, good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Jim Brett here of the New England Council, and we're pleased that you're wrapping up your week with the New England Council. 2021 has gotten off to a great start for us here, and it's hard to believe we're just a few days away from the month of April. So the year is going by very, very quickly. We have several other events planned in the next several weeks. On Monday, March 29th, we'll hear from Congressman Stephen Lynch, the congressman here in Boston. On Tuesday, we are looking forward to our second Council Connection virtual networking programs. Space is very limited. We have a few spots left, but anyone who participated in our first, I think would agree on two things. One, it was a great success, but two, it was a lot of fun. And we hope that many of you will participate once again. In April, we're looking forward to hosting several other members of the New England congressional delegation, including Vermont at-large Congressman Peter Welch and Connecticut's Representative Jayana Hayes will also be speaking to the New England Council. Also that month, we'll have special programs looking at the outlook for defense policy in the new Congress, and a virtual conversation with Canada's new Consul General here in New England. But today we're delighted to welcome back a tremendous advocate, not only for his district and the region, but for our nation. That's Congressman Jim Langevin. Many of you know that he was just reelected to his 11th term representing the wonderful state, the Ocean State, the 2nd Congressional District. Many of you know also that he's a senior member the House Armed Services Committee, where he chairs the Intelligence and Emerging Threats and Capability Subcommittee, as well as the House Homeland Security Committee, where he's been a national leader on issues of national security and cybersecurity in particular. He's been a very strong supporter of the region's defense industry. He's led efforts to double the production of the Virginia-class submarines built in his district. As part of the Democratic leadership team, Congressman Jim Langevin serves as both Democratic Regional Whip for New England and a member of the Majority Whip's Steny Hoyer's Senior Whip team, where he plays a key role in crafting the Democratic caucus legislative agenda. So we are very pleased the Congressman can join us today to provide an update on the many critical issues before Congress during these needless to say, challenging times in our nation's history. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable United States Representative, Jim Langevin.
Well, Jim, thank you very much for the kind words, the kind introduction. It's great to be back with the New England Council, and I certainly look forward to these annual events where we're together, albeit doing it virtually this time. We'd all rather be in person, but thanks for the invite to join you. It's great to be back with everyone. Here we have quite an audience, and maybe bigger than our usual crowd. So this is maybe good. We're reaching out to more people, which is nice. So I hope everyone's been staying safe and healthy during what has been obviously challenging time for the whole country. But I'm looking for our discussion today and get into some the Q&A as quickly as possible. So Jim, always great to see you. And before I begin my more formal remarks, I just want to thank you for your leadership of the New England Council, for how accessible you are. Obviously, no one understands politics and government better than you, since you were an elected official at one point yourself, and you understand the peaks and valleys we all have to deal with, and the work, the challenges of trying to achieve consensus wherever possible. So you provide a great nexus between the business community and government, and I appreciate your friendship. So let me just say, obviously, spring has come to New England, and in addition to the sights, the sounds, and the smells of the season, of course, there's been something else in the air, and that's hope. Now that we see we have the vaccine, several vaccines that are out there, and more people are getting vaccinated. I think that's critically important to our country, both for public health and for our economy. So one bright spot that just it can't get here, we can't get through this fast enough. But obviously, COVID-19 has been at the forefront of our minds now for more than a year at this point, and for good reason. Sadly, 500,000 Americans have lost their lives. Tens of millions have been infected, and no one in the country, unfortunately, has been able to avoid being affected in some way by the pandemic. Over the last year of 2020, I should say the lost year of 2020, the year of social distancing, the great pandemic, while historians may not yet have settled on a moniker for that the past year, there can be no doubt that they will write about it for decades to come, I'm sure. But while they will certainly write about the tragedy, I'm also beginning to think that they're right about the miracle of science that prevented the pandemic from being even worse. And I want to take a minute here just to pause and really thank all of our public healthcare workers, people that are on the front lines, doing their very best to save lives, keep people healthy. Also want to pause to just think about all those frontline workers that we wouldn't ordinarily think of as people like first responders, in addition to of course our police and fire, who are always on the front lines taking care of us. But even the basic grocery workers who are going to work every day to make sure that the people could keep food on their plates, continue to do the grocery shopping and basic human necessity. Even they too have really stepped up and been in defense, different kind of first responders and frontline workers. So we thank them as well. It's really just important to take a minute and reflect on their work. But obviously, there's the other miracle that we want to look at, and I think we have to be grateful for, is the miracle of science that again prevented the pandemic from being far worse than it could have been. The last I'm going to talk a little bit about that too, the miracle of science in developing the vaccines and the antivirals. In the last couple of weeks, I pull up the Washington Post each morning to see another 2 million doses of vaccine being delivered, and we really owe it to ourselves to reflect on what a stunning achievement this is, and really how we got here. I confess that I was skeptical when I first heard of some who were making promises last winter with about a new messenger RNA vaccine, a new way of developing vaccine. And I initially called, and I say that because I initially spoke with Dr. Tony Fauci, who I've known for more than a decade. He's been a friend. I have to say, he's one of the most authentic witnesses that's ever testified before me in any of my subcommittees, and I've developed, thankfully, a nice friendship with him over the years. But when he and I first spoke, and I asked him, I said, Tony, what do we have here? Is this the real deal? Is this a pandemic? Because unfortunately, that's what it looks like it's shaping up to be. It looks like we have a global pandemic on our hands. That was probably the end of February or early March of last year. And then we talked about what's the most optimistic view of what we think we can develop a vaccine. And he says, at the earliest, it's probably going to be 12 to 18 months before we'd have a vaccine. And we have to factor in also that even once you have the vaccine, you then have to do the trials and the tests and make sure that it's a safe and effective vaccine. So, we could be looking at maybe a couple of years. So thankfully, that it wasn't the case, that we did achieve the development of vaccine much earlier. And I have to say, if you ask any of my professional colleagues, though, they'll tell you that I'm one of the more, the wonkier guys in Congress, or the geekiest members around, always intrigued by the promise of technology. What's more, I believe in taking risks, calculated risk for sure, but betting on technological advances that have yet to be proven is how we make real progress. And it's why I love a lot of my work on the Armed Services Committee, overseeing all of our research and development portfolio. R&D is what makes sure that we stay ahead of the curve and stay one step ahead of our adversaries. And that's how I found myself in February of last year as one of the first members of Congress to ask about COVID-19 in the congressional hearing. So the topic of the hearing, which I was chairing, was the Department of Defense efforts to counter weapons of mass destruction. And the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, as it's known, had a rapid vaccine development as a key tool to combat biological attack. And DARPA, supported by funding provided by my subcommittee over the years, had sponsored several projects in this space. You know, DARPA it was created after Sputnik to avoid strategic surprise, and they do the high risk, high payoff research in national security that pays, you know, really untold dividends. And so one of the success stories, and now an up and coming biotech firm, is now a household name, Moderna. So the Moderna vaccine and really the Pfizer vaccine, the mRNA vaccine technology was designed because of DARPA research. That's what the basic science founded that improved that research to be so effective. So I raised this point not to take any sort of a victory lap, because obviously there's a lot of work to do and a lot of people have made this happen. But I wish I had the foresight to predict the next global pandemic or the next geopolitical conflict, but I most certainly do not. But the lack of knowledge is one of the things that animates my governing philosophy in a lot of ways. My new subcommittee on the House Armed Services Committee, it used to be, as Jim, you had mentioned, it's the up until this Congress, it was the Intelligence and Emerging Threats and Capabilities Subcommittee. But we've now created a new subcommittee because the portfolio is getting so big and technology is becoming so important. The subcommittee that was created is now a subcommittee on cyber, innovative technologies, and information systems, and is specifically aligned to look beyond the horizon at the threats that we are just beginning to understand. So the nearly 15 years that I've spent on cybersecurity policy are precisely because our day-to-day lives can be upended much easier than many of us even think. We found that, again, as a result of the pandemic. But I think the other lesson is that government can be a force for good when it comes to the most deadly and pernicious challenges that we face. Now, you know, I have to admit, you know, I came of age early during the Reagan presidency, and I always admired President Reagan for his ability to project a positive message about why America is such a great country, and I agree with a lot of those philosophies, those high goals that he set for the country. Nevertheless, I did strongly disagree with his conviction that government was the problem, not the solution to the problems, and I remain sort of disappointed by maybe the damage that philosophy has caused over the years, because I think it's a balance, right? We're just trying to achieve that right balance. But what's the right role of government? How much government involvement is enough? How much is too much? And so it is a balance. But with President Biden now at the helm, I think we may finally be turning the corner on this misunderstanding of the power of government, and ready to be a force for good. With the passage of the American Rescue Plan Act this month, the United States will have provided more fiscal relief than any other advanced economy on the planet. And while there are still sectors of the economy, particularly hospitality and personal services, that continue to suffer immensely, we have largely ridden out the massive disruption of last spring. And I really do think that we're turning a corner. So the American Rescue Plan Act is designed to complete that recovery and position us for success as we move to fully reopen. First and foremost, the bill includes investments in testing and vaccination to ensure that we fully crush the virus. So Also, we'll never get our economy running on all cylinders while we remain in a public health crisis. And getting shots in arms as quickly as possible must be our number one priority. And I'm certainly focused on supporting, making sure that happens. That's what the American Rescue Plan was all about, to make sure we had the resources to do that. I can tell you that, having been vaccinated myself, I can tell you that the peace of mind alone is worth its weight in gold. And I really do hope that you and your families will get your shots at the earliest opportunity. And the rescue plan also made substantial injections of liquidity into the heart of our economy, and that's the consumer. Right, $1,400 checks for most Americans, including dependents, will help struggling families pay the rent and leave those who have been more fortunate in the pandemic with their balance sheets, with the best balance sheets in years. Enhanced and extended unemployment benefits will keep those who have been sidelined due to the social distancing on their feet. And the historic expansion of the child tax credit will cut child poverty in half by the end of the year. So importantly, the American Rescue Plan helps state and local governments that have seen their revenues yo-yo over the past year. It's going to help stabilize things. So for those with steep declines, it will help keep their budgets balanced and allow them to keep the civil servants, from firefighters to sanitation workers, on the job without the threat of layoffs because of declining revenues that they've been affected because of COVID. And for those with whose revenues have not declined as much as expected, it helps them make down payments on infrastructure improvements. So the bill that we passed also includes a separate pot of money just for education, from K through 12 schools that have had to shift to online and hybrid schooling, to colleges and universities that have had their research and tuition dollars severely affected by the pandemic. But while the American Rescue Plan Act is an ambitious first step in the Biden agenda, it's only that, a first step. So the president campaigned on helping America build back better, and we are well on our way now to writing a groundbreaking infrastructure bill to do just that. And the need clearly is incredibly urgent. I was just watching CNBC this morning, and I saw Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg being interviewed, and he talked about, and he's spot on, that for years we have allowed an infrastructure deficit to continue to pile on itself, because we haven't kept up with our infrastructure needs. And yet countries around the world, particularly a country like China, is investing on orders of magnitude more in their infrastructure than we are. And they are going to be well positioned to challenge us both economically and, unfortunately, militarily in the years ahead, again, because they're making those investments. We can't allow that to happen. We need to double down and invest in our own infrastructure right here at home to make sure that we have a 21st century infrastructure for a 21st century economy. And by doing that, we're putting people to work. And this is one of those strong areas where I firmly believe we'll achieve strong bipartisan support. There's infrastructure needs in every district of the country, and I think this could be a real bright spot for bipartisanship, and I hope to see it happen. Because that infrastructure is crumbling, and it's not just our roads and bridges either. Schools built in the 50s and 60s are showing their age. We see it every day in the school buildings in our neighborhoods and in our communities. The pandemic, of course, has exposed an enormous digital divide between those who have easy access to broadband, and for those whose DSL is still, unfortunately, the standard, and that really needs to change. Storms in the south this winter, of course, have exposed weaknesses in our grid and the pipelines that supply our power plants. Near and dear to my heart, of course, is also our digital infrastructure. That's something else. We can't think of it in only bricks and mortar projects, but digital infrastructure, the IT systems that we rely on to provision essential services is exposed, as highlighted by the Russian SolarWinds incident and the Chinese campaign exploiting Microsoft Exchange server. Infrastructure investment is a bipartisan priority, and I'm sort of hopeful that my Republican colleagues will come to the table to negotiate. And you also think about how integrated our IT infrastructure is. You just think about the how states had to ramp up quickly in providing services like unemployment benefits to people, and they just could not keep up. The lines out the door just to apply for unemployment benefits was a real challenge. So, and again, both security of those systems and how antiquated they are, how slow they move, and how difficult it is to scale when you need to scale up quickly really became evidence that really laid bare the challenges of antiquated IT infrastructure. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to address that in an upcoming infrastructure bill. But again, infrastructure investment is a bipartisan priority, and I'm sure and hopeful that we can find that common ground. Also, Congress has made clear that the American Rescue Plan Act, that we're not going to be sidelined by obstructionism. President Biden is set to announce the contours of his plan next week, and the Speaker has already set the committee chairman to work drafting portions of an infrastructure package. For my part, again, I'm going to continue focusing heavily on IT modernization and making sure that any investments we make in physical infrastructure are also backed with investments in IT infrastructure, and also with the workforce dollars that we'll need to ensure that there are people there that with the right skills to actually complete these projects. So from a timeline perspective, I'm hearing that we'll be on the floor at some point in May with an infrastructure bill. But of course, as with all things in politics, timelines can slip. So we'll have to be a little bit flexible, but I think we're in the ballpark thinking about it in terms of the May timeframe. So just to kind of wrap things up in just a minute, I want to get to Q&A. I know that Jim has a bevy of questions that you've all submitted. So I'm just going to say just a few brief more words about my priorities in Congress to wrap it up, and then we can get to Q&A. So there are three major agenda items for my new subcommittee this year. First, we're going to be looking at the Pentagon's research and development enterprise to ensure that we are placing appropriate focus on the basic and early stage applied research that really leads to significant innovation. The Department of Defense bureaucracy is known for being rigid, and incremental progress is just not going to cut it. We're going to stand up to a rising China on the battlefield of the future. So we'll be looking heavily at the research portfolio and R&D efforts. Second, we are taking a hard look at how the department manages things like spectrum. So the reality is we're losing the race to 5G in this country, and we need to modernize DoD's use of spectrum if we hope to catch up and take the lead in the next generation of communications technology. And finally, I'm going to be pushing the Pentagon to acquire software smarter. Like many of your companies, software is increasingly the beating heart of critical military functions. Unlike many of your companies, though, the military services still acquire software as if it comes shrink wrapped from Circuit City. But we need to change that, and we need to change it fast. To any of you have come to these functions before, of course, also, you won't be surprised to hear that cybersecurity is also a top priority agenda item for the things I'll be working on, my team and I. I have to say I'm incredibly proud of the work that I did along with my fellow commissioners on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, which was a national commission that was created in the National Defense Authorization Act a couple of years ago. And our charge was to create an overarching, more effective strategy to protect the country from cyber attacks of significant consequence. And we finished our report in March of the previous year. and with 80 recommendations, 55 of which we turned into legislative proposals, and very pleased with the way that turned out. We were able to advance more than 24 of our recommendations in last year's NDAA, including one of my signature bills, the National Cyber Director Act, which I've been trying to create now for more than a decade, but we finally did it. And now we have the positions created. We created a national cyber director. That is Senate confirmed in the executive office of the president. We are waiting any time now for the president to appoint that first national cyber director. So basically, the legislation puts someone in charge of cyber at the White House, and I look forward to seeing the inaugural cyber director nominated in the coming weeks. This year, I expect to focus on also cyber diplomacy, strengthening partnerships between systemically important critical infrastructure and the government, and a Bureau of Cyber Statistics to help government and business better understand the effectiveness of cybersecurity controls. That's one kind of glaring question that's out there for many businesses, where if they're told, say, by the CISO or an outside sales group, look, if you adopt this cybersecurity tool on your systems, you're going to be that much more secure. Well, right now, we really don't have the facts, so to speak, the statistics to back that up. And this is going to help to answer that question definitively once we have that data. So I'm also going to continue to work with the Bipartisan Disabilities Caucus to ensure that government and the private sector can take advantage of our greatest untapped human resource, and that's people with disabilities. There's too many people with disabilities that are still unemployed. We need to change that. And by the way, maybe one of the silver linings, if there is one, of COVID, is the switch to online technology that we all use now on a daily basis, most times, multiple times a day. But this may be a game changer for people with disabilities too. Some who may be homebound, but can navigate their way around a computer and become IT experts and have a lot to offer through use of technology. If that's an avenue that's going to help lower that unemployment rate, well, by God, we've got to make sure we master that ability, again, further opening up doors of opportunity and bringing down barriers. So I'm also going to continue to champion foster youth, the most vulnerable among us, and help them find their forever families, and to make sure that those adoptions are successful long term. I do all of these things because I believe government can help. Just in closing, not alone by any means. Working with our private sector colleagues, like all of you, is essential, especially in new domains like cyberspace. But I believe, for me, it's an exciting time to be in Congress, working on substantive policy that will make the lives of everyday Americans better. I hope you share this vision, and I sure look forward to continued dialogue. And right now, I look forward to your questions. So thanks, Jim, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Well, thanks very much. Can I ask the first question be on COVID? You sent a letter earlier this week with your colleagues, I think it was Jimmy Panetta, and you, to the Secretary of Defense, urging him to make COVID vaccines mandatory for all U.S. troops. And apparently, there's so much disinformation out there that it's been said that a third of the personnel in the military are refusing to get the vaccine. So, I mean, don't you believe that service members on the front line should be required to get a vaccine?
I do want to see as many people vaccinated as soon as possible. And it is troubling when we have some that aren't getting the vaccine. But I do want to look through this very carefully. I know that my colleague Jimmy Panetta had sent a letter, and we're looking at that right now. But I share the concerns of those that you have a significant number of service members not getting vaccinated, but we really need to look at that further.
I know that you got a couple of your colleagues from New England. Jim McGovern has signed on to the letter, and Jana Hayes has signed on to the letter. But it seems to be disturbing to know that many of the frontline troops are refusing to take the vaccine. But hopefully, with the letter and maybe other members prodding the Secretary of Defense, that maybe the numbers will change.
Yeah, it is the one difficult part of this whole pandemic has been the politicization of the virus and the vaccine and mask wearing. I know it's been very frustrating for public health officials that that the virus has been politicized. I'm hoping we can get away from that and really just rely on public health data and public health advice, and certainly getting the vaccine is one of the chief recommendations.
But you mentioned that the infrastructure is next on the docket, and it's estimated it's going to be big and bold. It might be as high as $3 trillion. And people will ask, how do we pay for a $3 trillion budget item? You indicate it could be bipartisan, the infrastructure. Do you really believe it'll be bipartisan when they put in the source of revenue that would be required to pay for the infrastructure? There's talk that we're going to revisit the tax cuts that President Trump implemented, that we're going to go from 21% on the corporate tax back to 27%, increase the personal income tax on the very, very wealthiest from 37% to 39%, but also to increase the capital gains tax and maybe some other loopholes in there. Do you believe that your colleagues on the other side are going to support this new source of revenue in order to pay for the infrastructure bill?
Well, we're talking. I think you're talking about the tax cuts and Jobs Act, but nothing has been decided yet. But right now, certainly interest rates are at record lows, and we need to take advantage of that. And if we're going to invest and go big in infrastructure, now is the time to do it. So, certainly long term, we're going to have to pay for it. And I do believe that we need a more fair and balanced tax code to make sure that everyone's paying their fair share. I know that President Biden has said that no one making under $400,000 is going to see a tax increase. So he's been clear on that point. But for people making certainly more than $400,000, certainly more than $1 million a year, I think that an adjustment in the tax code is appropriate, and if that's going to help us to pay for our some of our infrastructure needs as well as other priorities for the country, I think we need to look at that. I'm not sure yet on the corporate tax rate. By the way, I know there's talk of bringing that to 28%. I suppose that's a starting point in terms of what the president is looking at, but I don't want to see the tax rate go so high that it makes us less competitive in comparison to other countries around the world. That was the whole problem that we saw before with revenues being kept offshore and companies basically deferring their taxes for decades in some cases. So we have to make sure that the tax rate is competitive. If President Biden thinks it's too low right now and they're going to adjust that, let's use good data to suggest what is fair, but doesn't put our countries at a disadvantage on the international stage.
It's been said that more than 300 of your colleagues have never served during a period of earmark existence. An even higher percentage of staff have not been around for them either. But now you and your colleagues are preparing to bring back the earmarks. I guess you call them community project funding requests. Maybe that might help on your infrastructure and getting people to support the bill now that you have earmarks. But give me your thoughts on how this is going to play out, the earmarks. And do you have some ideas, even in your own district or for the state, on earmark projects?
Yeah, so it's true. I was around when earmarks existed, and I can tell you that they're important investments in our communities. Again, I've been around long enough to remember them, and let me tell you that I'm glad it looks like they're coming back. It's been a top priority for Rosa DeLaura, who's our chair of the Appropriations Committee, and look. There's certainly members who have used them under the old system going back in the day, but as we improve transparency, I believe that we're able to ferret them out much more easily. If anyone tries to abuse it, we're going to put in the right safeguards so that they can't be abused, and on net, we've already ceded, I think, far too much power in terms of spending and directing spending to the presidency. And, congressionally directed spending is a way for us to really exert the power of the purse in the way that it was intended, and a way that's really incredibly meaningful for the people we know best. And that's our constituents. So, I'm going to say that I look to some growing pains this year as we ease our way back into community project funding, but I think it's the right thing to do, and I'm going to be championing them for my district. There's nobody that knows better what are the funding priorities and needs for our constituents than members of Congress who were closest to their constituents, rather than in the past when I should have qualified for your viewers that when we did away with earmarks, we used to be able to advocate for specific projects, so that it was for a college or a university. We would be in direct communication with them and their priorities, and working collaboratively with those entities or cities and towns. Yeah, we understood the meaning behind the project, why it would make a big difference, and we could advocate for that earmark. When we get away with them, we basically created pools of money at the national level, and we basically told the administration, okay, you administer them, and a college or university would send it to, say, the Department of Education. They had a grant proposal, and then the administration, some bureaucrat behind a desk in Washington, would make make the decision. How the heck do they know about what's important to the University of Rhode Island or Rhode Island College, or a project that's important to the city of Warwick, where I'm from? And so we're going to change that dynamic. It's not going to be a bureaucrat in DC. It's going to be us, again, exercising the power of the purse, but being effective advocates for our constituents.
Do you have any earmark projects in mind for your district or for the state?
So I've reached out to the presidents of our public colleges and universities, also the mayors and some town administrators here in Rhode Island, and we're working those things through right now. We're only going to be able to submit 10 of them, and we're told that only about 4 of them are going to get funded. So it's not like there's a lot of them that we're going to be able to fund. It's kind of a crawl, walk, run situation, but I think we're going to be off to a good start.
Just another question on the COVID. Both the House and the Senate have seen bills introduced which seek to establish a 9/11 style commission to better understand what transpired during the COVID-19 pandemic. Do you think this type of commission would be useful, and any sense of whether this proposal will even get any traction?
So I know that we do have a commission that's set up. Jim Clyburn, the whip, is actually is actually running that right now. There's also the talk of a 9/11 style commission for what happened, the Capitol insurrection too. So there's kind of two processes that we're looking at right now. But I guess I touched on my opening remarks that we're currently living through a dual crisis: our public health and our economic crisis. So our first priority really has to be to stop these crises from worsening. To do that, obviously, we have to continue increasing access to the vaccine while also providing the financial resources that our nation needs to recover. And certainly, the American Rescue Plan, put us well on the way to achieving that goal. But we also have to do more, including ensuring that Paycheck Protection Extension Act, which is now passed the House and Senate, is signed into law. I expect that's going to happen imminently. And again, as you noted, bills to establish a 9/11 style commission have been introduced in both chambers, and even House Majority Whip Clyburn has stated that such a commission might be necessary. So I'm certainly open to establishment of such a commission. However, the success of these commissions rests on bipartisanship, on good faith, and really search for the truth. And so I hope that will be there. I also believe a lot of oversight work can be done through our existing committee structure, including through my position on the House Armed Services and Homeland Security committees. But I also will point out that what Jim Clyburn is doing, the commission that he's chairing, to look at how COVID money is being spent, making sure it's spent effectively as intended.
Recently, the House Democrats introduced that Clean Futures Act, which is that sweeping energy bill which sets some very ambitious carbon benchmarks and renewable energy goals. Rhode Island, of course, is a leader in the renewable energy, is home to the first U.S. Offshore wind farm. What steps do you think we should be taking as a country to address the climate change and also to promote more renewables?
Yeah, so obviously climate change is a critical, I think, national security issue. It's important to the health and survival of the planet. I certainly applaud our state leaders for prioritizing renewable energy and support former Governor Raimondo's goal of reaching a 100% renewable electricity by 2030. The first goal of its kind, as I understand it, in the nation. The Clean Futures Act also includes a nationwide clean energy standard requiring all electricity suppliers to obtain 100% clean electricity by 2035, which is in line with the Biden administration's goal. But in order to reach these ambitious but necessary milestones, we really have to invest in our grid infrastructure. And I say that because without the transmission lines necessary to move renewable energy from where it's generated to where it's needed, or the batteries to store it, we're going to fall short. And I don't want to see us fall short. So, these investments are not only good for our planet, but I believe also for our economy. So, renewable infrastructure investment is going to lead really to families supporting green energy jobs and help stimulate our local communities as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. But I expect to see significant investments in clean energy in the forthcoming infrastructure package that I talked about earlier in the next major item that's on the Democrats' agenda.
The House recently passed the H.R. 1, I think it's named after John Lewis, a sweeping voting rights bill, which include an amendment that you introduced to ensure that our elections are safeguarded against cybersecurity threats. Can you tell us more about that provision, but also tell us how optimistic are you that the Senate's going to adopt it?
Yeah, so the Voting Rights Act was critically important. Hence, why we named it HR1. We gave it that bill title. So it's really important. My amendment that you talked about, which was the only bipartisan amendment, by the way, offered to the bill on the floor, it would basically establish a senior policy advisor position on the staff of the Election and Assistance Commission, and explicitly calls out cybersecurity as an ongoing responsibility of the EAC. The amendment flows from my work on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission that I talked about earlier, whose aim is to defend the United States from significant cyber attacks. And it also allows the EAC to better assist states and localities in defending the voting system infrastructure. So I'm hopeful that HR1 or a similar Voting Rights Act package will advance in the Senate, but I know it'll be very challenging in its current form without significant changes to the filibuster. And President Biden kind of addressed that yesterday in his first press conference. But my real hope is that bipartisan groups of senators, like one of my good friends, Angus King, is helping to lead, will come to a compromise that allows us to advance election integrity.
A couple of armed services questions. One is from friends from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. They're concerned about how can the academic and the commercial defense and non-defense communities ensure that investments in blue S&T, the science and technology, including science and technology infrastructure, are incorporated as part of the broader S&T initiatives being discussed in Congress and the administration.
Yeah, so I share the concerns that that climate has more effects on our planet than simply warmer temperatures. Too, that's a number of important things that we got to address. There's much more to learn when it comes to the effect of climate on our oceans and how that in turn affects naval operations. Certainly, as an ocean state native, it's my responsibility to advocate for oceans and the House Armed Services Committee. Unfortunately, the department and some members of Congress, I think, still think that of climate as primarily a base resiliency problem. And so the fact that the department needs to invest more research funding into oceanographic studies so that we can understand how climate affects our ocean-related missions is important. This research, I think, is going to have implications for submarine warfare, and it may also provide insights into onshore operations. And our oceans obviously have a powerful effect on weather patterns and also on currents. And we've only really begun our understanding of that relationship. So once we have better understanding of the ripple effects of climate change on our oceans, I believe that the Navy is going to see potential in the research that we want to do more and more.
There's another question here for you. You are the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee Subcommittee on Cyber Innovative Technologies and Information Systems, which puts you right in the center of Congress's effort to ensure that our nation's military is adequately prepared to face cyber challenges from any adversary. Based on your knowledge of our nation's military, and to the extent you can tell us, is the United States in a good position to defend against a cyber attack on our military systems? And are we also in a position to help our allies deter any potential adversaries from similar threats?
Yeah, and I grapple with that question every day. I know that we're in a strong position on the technology front, on the cybersecurity front. We have incredibly powerful tools that we've developed, and technology certainly gives us our advantage, but we're also incredibly dependent on it. And so our cyber warriors, our US Cyber Command, for example, are working every day to keep our military installations and our weapon systems and communication network safe and secure, making sure that they are able to do what they need to do when we call upon them. And they are the best in the world in helping our allies who who want assistance in identifying vulnerabilities and deterring bad actors. Beyond military systems, however, we also, I believe, have to look after our critical infrastructure at home, and showing whether that's power plants or hospitals, voting records, or even our air traffic control systems. We have a close call with water treatment plant in Florida. If you remember in the headlines not too long ago, just recently, the SolarWinds and Microsoft Exchange server incidents really have been wake-up calls for us all, that we're not out of the woods. We're not as secure as that we need to be. And we really need to pay attention to the vulnerabilities and really address them before something worse happens. I've always been worried about the issue of the cyber 9/11, right? That we're caught off guard and create areas of our critical infrastructure that's owned and operated in the private sector is hit. And whether it's our banking system, our telecommunication systems, or our electric grid and power generation facilities, we've got to be mindful that we are still vulnerable. So thankfully, the most recent NDAA had several cyber provisions to streamline the government's approach to defending our nation and improve collaboration between the government and the private sector. For this year, I'm going to focus on ensuring these recommendations are implemented. We have cyber challenges today, but we also have to confront them before they become crises.
Good. I know we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to try to get a couple of these questions in. Rhode Island is one of a growing number of states that have legalized recreational marijuana. However, we now have a growing number of legitimate licensed businesses who cannot access banking and other financial services, since marijuana is still a controlled substance under the federal law. Last week, the bipartisan Safe Banking Act, which would create protections for depository institutions that they provide financial services, cannabis-related businesses and service providers for those businesses, was reintroduced in the House. New England Council, needless to say, has been supporting this legislation since its inception. So we're very interested to hear what you're hearing from your colleagues, as well as your thoughts on the bill.
So let me just say, I support alleviating the disparity between states and federal cannabis laws. My constituents, as well as citizens of other states where marijuana is legal for medical or recreational use, I should say, should not have to live in fear of violating federal law while complying with state laws. So to that end, I voted in favor of the Safe Banking Act when it passed the House with bipartisan support last Congress. I think this bill would be a step in the right direction. As long as cannabis businesses are operating within the bounds of state law, I think they should have access to the same financial instruments of any other business. And in particular, the Safe Banking Act provides an avenue for communities that were hurt the most by the war on drugs to now benefit from emerging markets in states that have legalized recreational marijuana use. So while I believe we need to conduct additional research into cannabis and its effects, I'm going to continue to support legislation that allows states to be laboratories of democracy and that enhance our understanding of the substance. But research is important. Right now there's not much research going on, either for medical use or for other effects of cannabis, because it's been a scheduled drug, the controlled substance. And I think it's time that we change that so that we can do that research. But again, going back to the banking issue, I think that we need to address that.
Right. A question here on a topic you mentioned in your introductory remarks, and that's disability. You've been a strong advocate and a leader in the workforce inclusion for people with disabilities. At his confirmation hearing, now Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh, was asked by Senator Bob Casey about how he would seek to grow participation of people with disabilities in the labor force. What programs or policies do you think Secretary Walsh and DOL should focus on first, and how can we in the business community help?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought this up, because it is a topic that is of concern to me. And Um, I would say that unfortunately, even after 30 years of the enactment of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the unemployment rate for people with disabilities remains twice as high as the national rate, and I think that's shameful in a lot of ways. We better do better. The federal government is meant to be a model employer, and the first thing the Department of Labor should focus on is ensuring that the government is hiring people with disabilities across all positions and at all levels. I believe that this should also be true of the administration's political appointees. Last Congress, I co-led a letter with Senator Tammy Duckworth, my good friend, to investigate the federal government's hiring and retention practices related to individuals with disabilities. And I really think that we have to continue examining why approximately 60% of people with disabilities leave their positions within 2 years. So I think the business community here can assist in increasing disability employment by learning more about what reasonable accommodations look like. Sometimes they can be as simple as a ramp or accessible technology that cost on average of accommodation for an individual of less than $500. So certainly not cost prohibitive. And I would encourage employers to listen to the needs of their employees. And if an employee has a specific need to work remotely or requires some flexibility in their work schedule, I truly believe that implementing creative solutions improves morale, and it also empowers employees to be more productive. So the pandemic has shown us that companies can accommodate non-traditional work structures, as I talked about in my opening comments. That might be one of the silver linings of this pandemic. And I hope that flexibility continues after the pandemic.
Great. Final question is, I'm sure, is an issue that's close and dear to your heart, and that's the census. The Census Bureau announced last month that it was delaying the certification of the 2020 population count from 3/31 to September 30th of this year. Well, no results are final. The national narrative has long suggested and continues to discuss that Rhode Island may be in jeopardy of consolidating from the current 2 congressional districts down to maybe a one at-large district. Needless to say, we, the council, we're very upset over that. We would do everything and anything we can do to maintain those 2 seats. So I guess what we're saying is, what can be done that would ensure that a very fair opportunity is given to Rhode Island and to New England to maintain full representation for the 2 seats for your great state?
Yeah. So the time frame that you mentioned, by the way, in September, that's for redistricting. Reapportionment will still understand. I think it's going to be next month, the end of next month, that we'll know whether Rhode Island is going to keep 1 or 2 seats. Let me say that I certainly hope that our work on having a complete count will pay off, and that we'll retain 2 congressional seats. However, I'm also aware that the prior administration made every effort to sabotage the census, including ending it prematurely. So with the apportionment numbers scheduled to be released next month, state leaders will need to take a very close look at the final count to see if it really does accurately reflect our population. But again, it's certainly my hope that Rhode Island's efforts over the last year in having a complete count will result in keeping both seats. It really has serious consequences and ramifications if we don't, most especially around the funding formulas that will be with us for a decade. And that will be a lawsuit to Rhode Island of millions of dollars that we don't get that count right, and if we certainly lose 2 seats. We don't want that to happen.
Exactly. Well, again, our hour is up. I just want to thank you, Congressman, for spending time with us, keeping us all informed. And this is a terrific session, and we touched on an awful lot of topics, but we thank you for what you're doing, what you continue to do. You got a busy agenda coming up. Your plate is full, but we thank you for always being available to the New England Council, and We look forward to meeting in person sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, we just want you to take care, stay safe, and stay healthy.
Thank you, Jim. All my best to you and your team. Thank you to the New England Council for all you do day in and day out, and look forward to our continued work together. Look forward to the
Right.
next one. Hopefully, next time I speak to you, it'll be in person.
The only other thing I would add is that this morning, we just released our annual report 2020, and it's on a digital format. And let me just say that if you look at it, you'll be impressed on how much work we did accomplish during the pandemic. And I want to just salute Emily Heisek, who led the effort as the project manager to make sure that we could do a digital annual report, and being first. I think you'll be very, very impressed with the quality and the amount of work that the entire staff has produced during this pandemic 2020. So if you have a chance, look at it. If you think it's really good, let me know. If you have a problem with it, let Emily know. But all in all, I want to thank the staff for putting together this great annual report. And again, to everyone, stay safe, stay healthy.
You too, Jim. Thank you.
Thank
Take care.